If it's Friday, the Biden campaign is in crisis and could be on the verge of collapse as 11 more Democratic lawmakers call on the president to drop out of the race, and the Biden family now discussing his potential exit. Plus, anything but conventional. Former President Trump accepts his party's nomination with a record-long 93-minute rally-style address less than a week after surviving an assassination attempt. And millions of people are still feeling the impacts of a massive global tech outage that disrupted air travel, hospitals, 911 services, banks, and businesses around the world. Hi there, happy Friday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington. As Republicans close out their national convention, the walls are closing in on President Biden. Despite his public defiance about staying in the presidential race, my NBC News colleagues report that members of Biden's own family are now discussing what his withdrawal might look like. That's according to two people familiar with the discussions. It comes amid a groundswell of new calls for him to step aside. 11 more Democrats joined the list today, including two close allies of former Speaker Pelosi. The list now includes more than 30 members of Congress, including 3 senators, with names that cut across different demographic ideologies and seniorities. Even longtime Biden allies, like Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who co-chairs the Biden campaign, seem to be opening the door for him to bow out.
I think our president is weighing what he should weigh, which is who is the best candidate to win in November and to carry forward the Democratic Party's values and priorities in this campaign. I am confident he is hearing what he needs to hear from colleagues, from the public.
Now, Coons later tweeted that he stands behind Biden 100%. And sources tell us that right now, the president, who is isolating with COVID, feels personally hurt and betrayed at how so many in his party have left him hung out to dry. Publicly, however, the Biden campaign remains defiant and perhaps hoping to breathe new life into his campaign after former President Trump's rally-like convention address last night. In a new statement put out by the campaign in response to that address, President Biden says, quote, "I look forward to getting back on the campaign trail next week to continue exposing the threat of Donald Trump's Project 2025 agenda while making the case for my own record and the vision that I have for America." Meanwhile, top Biden campaign officials acknowledge that their support has slipped, but they remain publicly adamant that Biden is absolutely staying in the race.
Joe Biden is more committed than ever to beat Donald Trump. And we believe on this campaign, we are built for the close election that we are in, and we see the path forward. I'm not here to say that this hasn't been a tough several weeks for the campaign. There's no doubt that it has been. And we've definitely seen some slippage in support, but it has been a small movement. And you know this, the reason is because so much of this race is hardened already.
But comments like that come amid new reporting that Kamala Harris's allies have begun quietly mapping out what her presidential campaign apparatus would look like and what her path to victory could be in November. Joining me now is our team of reporters. Monica Alba is at the White House, Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill, and Julie Sirkin in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Monica, let's start with you. What's the latest? It seems like every time I talk to someone, they say, what's going to happen? Did last night's speech by former President Trump have any impact on President Biden's thinking?
I think it hardened his resolve, at least publicly, Ryan, that he is dedicated to staying in this race, that he is committed to continuing this fight, as he said in that statement that you highlighted in your introduction, where he is talking about the future. He's talking about heading out on the campaign trail next week, saying that he really wants to put the focus back on Donald Trump and his agenda and what was on display during the Republican National Convention this week in Milwaukee. But of course, the backdrop to all of that is this massive conversation that's going on with people that he's close to, with people that he has known and worked with for years, who are really wondering about his own path forward beyond the maybe next couple of days or weeks, and who are evaluating his larger future and legacy, and that has really entered the chat now in terms of the last couple of weeks, where there was a lot of day-by-day discussion, and now it's a little bit more long-term thinking of how is Joe Biden going to be remembered in history because of this very complicated moment. So I think now that the R-N.C. has wrapped, the Democrats and the re-election effort are obviously trying to project this image of confidence and full steam ahead, and that's what you saw from the campaign co-chair, and that is what we are hearing from Biden campaign officials on the record who are really talking about this again in terms of what the president is doing. But what we know from our reporting is that yes, this will be up to President Biden to ultimately make this decision about staying in the race. And from what we understand, he hasn't decided yet. So that leaves the option that he could ultimately decide to bow out, even if that's not what he's saying right now, Ryan.
Yeah, maybe talk and expand on that a little bit more, because I do think it's significant that the family's even opening up this line of conversation about the potential of him not continuing on in this race. It's important for our viewers to keep in mind that there's only one person that can make that decision. It's President Biden, and it seems as though he is not quite there yet.
I think that's exactly right. And so this is coming from people who obviously love him so deeply that they're trying to take his years of public service and time in office and say, well, if you were to think about leaving the race and bowing out, what would that look like? And would it be befitting of what you've done for this country, according to the conversations that our sources have told us about, that they're evaluating those kinds of things when they're having the discussions. But that, again, it's all very hypothetical because the president himself hasn't come to a conclusion one way or the other. But we do know that over the last couple of days, some of his own conversations with other people, with allies and people who are calling him, they have become more reality-based, we're told, where he himself is confronting this question of, if I was to make this really consequential, really monumental decision, what would that look like? And the takeaway, Ryan, is that we understand the president wants to be able to do that with his own timeline and with a little bit of space. So that is why that is something that could still be a couple of days or weeks away, potentially. We just don't know.
Meanwhile, that would quickly shift the focus to Vice President Harris. We understand that she led a call with some Democratic donors. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, she just wrapped up that call, and she offered some remarks that were really similar to what she talked about when she was on the trail in North Carolina yesterday, trying to talk about the R-N.C. and this question of unity, and saying that if you're going to really use that term, you need to go beyond the one word and demonstrate how you would do that. So again, trying to put that back on Republicans. But she opened the conversation with Democratic donors, I'm told, by saying, look, I'm very confident in President Biden, and we are going to win this election. That was her prediction. And we should point out, Ryan, if people are thinking, wait, well, why is the vice president talking to Democratic donors and not the president? I'm told by a campaign official that it was the president's advisors who asked her to do this call. But we really should point out to everybody, all the reporting we've been doing for weeks, which is that there's a massive issue when it comes to top donors who have severe concerns and anxieties about the health of President Biden's campaign and his future. And they're saying, wait a second, I may not donate if I don't know if he's going to stay at the top of the ticket or potentially move out and somebody else could come in. So this is probably an attempt to try to calm that in some sense. But again, it was the vice president delivering that message and trying to say that the Biden-Harris ticket was full steam ahead.
Okay, we'll have to see how this all plays out. Thank you for that, Monica. Let's move down Pennsylvania Avenue to Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill. Sahil, it seems like every time we check our phone, there's a new member of the Democratic caucus on Capitol Hill calling for Biden to drop out today. It seems as though this stream is flowing once again. Who stands out to you in the list that emerged today?
A few things stand out, Ryan. The first is the number. 11 Democrats in a single day. I believe that's the most number of Democrats who have come out calling for President Biden to step aside in any day of this entire campaign. And then the other thing that stands out is the broad cross-section of the party that these new members calling on him to step aside represent, starting with Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren. Let's show her statement. She's a California Democrat, a close ally of former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, tells Biden, quote, your candidacy is on a trajectory to lose the White House and potentially impact crucial House and Senate races down ballot. It is for these reasons that I ask you to step aside from our party's nomination. In addition, members calling on Biden to step aside include Mark Vesey, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, Mark Pocan, a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Chuy Garcia, a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Greg Landsman, who represents a swing district in Cincinnati, one of those districts that'll determine which party is likely to control the House, and Senator Martin Heinrich, a New Mexico Democrat. Joe Biden served in that chamber for a long time. He's a bit of a Senate snob himself. Those voices all matter. So this is not simply one faction of people, one set of people that Joe Biden can point to and say, oh, well, there's a whole other set of people who do support me. This is evidence of cracks all over this dam.
All right, Sahil, and we'll talk to Congressman Landsman in just a few minutes on this program. Sahil, thank you for that. Let's move now to the battleground, and that's Pennsylvania, where Julie Sirkin is standing by. So, Julie, you spent the day with Senator Bob Casey. He is facing a tough re-election campaign. He has, for the most part, stuck by President Biden, albeit, I would say, with a lot of enthusiasm. Where does he stand today on Biden's candidacy?
And I'll tell you, Ryan, having asked him the same questions yesterday in a rural county about 3 hours from here, to come in over here in Drexel Hill, the suburbs of Philadelphia, asking Casey again if he's in Biden's corner. There's a little bit of an opening there, a little bit of a softening. And Casey says that's because he's been talking to voters and constituents all around the state like we have. And perhaps he should take in their considerations and concerns about Biden more seriously. Take a listen to this.
I've heard a lot of people across the state come to me and express real concerns about him going forward, and I think that's a concern that I've got to be responsive to and listen to. I don't think there's a specific timeline, but I do think it's going to be very soon where we have to begin to move forward. We can't stay in the position right now where there's no definitive determination, because the differences in these elections.
And the point Casey was making there is we have to get back to talking about what is wrong with the other side, the problems and the challenges with the Republican Party, especially with former President Donald Trump at the top of that ticket. Casey, though, you heard him talking about the timeline there. Look, he is outperforming Biden in this state. Obviously, that is notable and important for Casey heading into November against his Republican opponent. But this allyship with the Biden family goes decades back for Casey. And so this is a situation of respect and love for Biden as a person, where he just doesn't want to get over his skis here, despite the concerns that he's hearing, Ryan.
But you've also been having these same conversations he's been having with voters. What are they telling you about the political moment we find ourselves in?
100%. And I actually spoke to one voter, one woman named Jeanette, as she was going into the event that Casey was holding with suburban women here. And I asked her that very question. What do you make of all of this? And she said yesterday is the day that she decided, after talking to her family members and friends, that President Biden cannot be the person that wins in November, that leads the ticket. And it is because of that that she came here today to try to talk to Senator Casey, who she respects as well, to try and change his mind here. I also spoke to other Democratic voters. They all overwhelmingly said that they are bleak, they are grim. This mood over the last month since the debate that we saw on June 27th has just left them feeling sick. One woman I spoke to said there's just no time to make a change with 3 months until November. She said she would vote for Biden, in her words, quote, even if he was on a ventilator. So a range of opinions here, but overwhelmingly, as Casey said, he's hearing from voters that they have concerns. He's not going to join his other two colleagues, Senator Martin Heinrich and John Tester, another vulnerable Democrat in a battleground state, in calling on Biden to exit the race just yet. But certainly there is some room there potentially in the coming days, depending on what President Biden does.
All right, Julie, getting the important perspective on the ground with the voters that matter. Julie Sirkin, thank you for that report. Let's go now to Simone Sanders Townsend, the co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC. She's, of course, a former senior advisor to the Biden-Harris 2020 campaign and worked for Kamala Harris. So, Simone, you know the president well. What's weighing on him right now? He says that he's made a decision. Obviously, this isn't being accepted by the party. How could this play out?
Well, Ryan, look, I think it's an important question. I think part of what just knowing the president, what is likely weighing on him is I think you and I have discussed this before. I think back to 2019, 2020, when a lot of the Democratic candidates were still in the race in that primary. There were many of them that did not truly have a viable path. And I remember then candidate Biden pulled us aside in one of our meetings and told us he doesn't want anybody calling on anyone else to drop out. That's not something he is going to do, and that he went forward forward and went ahead and said that publicly when he was asked by reporters at the time, because he said this is a personal decision that this is for the candidate to make. And he's been a candidate. He's had to make that decision before, and he would never want anyone to pressure him, and he would not pressure anyone else. And so I have to imagine that he is just personally stunned by the volume of individuals who are coming out that he has known for years saying he should step down.
You know better than anyone how close his family is and how he holds them tight and leans on their counsel with almost every decision that he makes, particularly about his own political future. So how important are these conversations that he's having with his family? Do you think that they would all be on the same page? Could there be mixed opinions within the family? And how important will they be in preserving his legacy if he does decide that this is the end of his political career?
I think within a family, there's going to be a very, I could just imagine a conversation with my own family, Ryan, about what in making a decision. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Joe Biden's decision. And as of this, right now, as we speak, at about a little over past 4:15 Eastern Standard Time, Joe Biden is in this race. And he has said for weeks, frankly, in the face of the calls to step down, that he is in this race. I have described it as he's swimming against the tide. And I think as long as the president would like to swim, he is going to continue to stay in the race. And it's really a standoff right now, Ryan. You have elected leaders on Capitol Hill, more which are coming out by the hour, saying they like Joe Biden, but he should step down. Then on the other hand, you have voters. Just yesterday, 1,400 Black women signed a letter. These are grassroots leaders across the country saying they backed the Biden-Harris ticket, and the time for a debate about who the nominee should be was during the primaries. And so these women who are representative leaders of their communities across the country, in many of them battleground states, are saying he shouldn't leave. Then you've got D-N.C. members who are saying, look, we're with the president if he's in it, and the D-N.C. members and the delegates, many of which are saying we still, I haven't spoken to a delegate, and I talked to a number who hasn't said that they are now not supporting the president. And the caucus chairs of the D-N.C. various caucuses are still saying that their pledged delegates are staying pledged delegates. And so it is like a game of chicken, for lack of a better term. And the question is, who is going to blink first? The president is resolute, but the opposition to his candidacy on Capitol Hill is also resolute, Ryan. And I think the last point I'll make is that you hear a lot from the elected members of Congress about polling data. You just heard Senator Casey talk about, what he's hearing from people in his districts, a voter themselves saying, I want to speak to Senator Casey about this. The polling is not predictive. It's indicative of where people are at any given time. What I've heard from a number of House Democrats specifically and Senate Democrats who were going to have a tough time this cycle, with the polling that they are seeing, is they feel like to them it is insurmountable. Now, campaigns, the work of a campaign is to do the work to change the polling. I'm hearing a lot of members say they don't want to do that work with President Biden on their coattails, but still many more saying that they, at this point, are still with him.
All right, we don't have that much more time, but you're such a great person to talk to about this because your experience is so wide and varying within the Democratic Party. I'm interested in your take on how progressives are going to respond to all of this. They seem to be the group that right now is most firmly in the camp of Biden shouldn't go. I'm talking about Bernie Sanders, AOC, and others. You work for Bernie Sanders. If Biden does decide to go, are progressives just going to stand by and let Kamala Harris become the nominee? Are they going to want to have a say in who her running mate is? They're such an important part of the base of this Democratic Party. What role are they going to play in this discussion? Because at this point, I feel like they're not getting that much attention.
Well, look, Ryan, I think the reality is, just from a pure process party standpoint, the ticket is the Biden-Harris ticket. And you just reported on the call that Vice President Harris did with the donors. So her name is on the money that has also been raised. I think, frankly, the smoothest path here is that Joe Biden stays in this race and everybody just backs up and Democrats get about the business of trying to win an election in general. But I think the next step, if the president does decide he can no longer swim against the tide, the vice president is the only choice. she is battle tested. She has been doing the work. And when I say the work, I mean, I think back to when the United States got into a dust up with France over their deal with Australia on the submarines. Mm-hmm. It was the vice president that the president asked to go to France and smooth over things with President Macron. The work that she's done, helping the president rally European allies, especially right before and in the immediate aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And so there's just some of this is like, when the convention comes, it's about 2 months a month until people actually start voting with the early vote. you do not have a lot of time to raise a lot of new money and introduce someone to the voters. And so the vice president, to me, seems like the most viable path. And I don't know if progressives across the board are going to stick with her, but I saw AOC's live last night, and she seemed to be in the Kamala Harris camp.
Well, Simone, you are my queen on many levels, but I know you've had a hellish day trying to travel across this country, and you were caught up in the travel nightmare that so many Americans were, and went to great lengths to be on this program today.
Coming to you live from Baltimore Penn Station,
Ryan. It looks great. It means so much to all of us that you made that effort. I thank you so much. Thanks. Coming up, toning it down versus trumping it up. What's next for the Trump campaign after his lengthy convention speech that began with calls for unity, but then veered into more familiar Trump territory? We'll hear what voters who watched the speech in battleground Michigan have to say. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Former President Trump pledged to deliver a unifying speech when he took the stage at the Republican National Convention at the end of a week where Republicans showed they were certainly unified as a party. But instead, the former president's first speech since the assassination attempt was a record-breaking long convention speech that had many of the hallmarks of a good old-fashioned Trump rally. Mr. Trump did begin his remarks last night by recounting the moment he was shot and with a nod to unity.
I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America. I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here. No. I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
Now, but despite those moments of reflection, which did bring some members of the audience to tears, and a moving moment of silence to honor the firefighter who was killed at the rally, last night's speech was in large part just a return to form for the former president, repeating the grievances, attacks, and election fraud lies that are characteristic of his campaign speeches.
We must not criminalize dissent or demonize political disagreement, which is what's been happening in our country. In that spirit, the Democrat Party should immediately stop weaponizing the justice system. Every week they get another subpoena from the Democrats, crazy Nancy Pelosi. They've got to stop that because they're destroying our country. The election result, we're never going to let that happen again. They used COVID to cheat. Only going to use the term once. Biden, I'm not going to use the name anymore, just one time. The damage that he's done to this country is unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
Joining me on set is NBC News senior national politics reporter John Allen, who is fresh off the plane from Milwaukee, and NBC's Yamiche Alcindor. She is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is one of our decider counties, where she watched last night's speech with voters. So, John, I have to imagine that the speech was pretty late at night. If you fell asleep at maybe 10:30, quarter to 11, you had a very different impression if you stayed up until midnight. I mean, what was your impression in the room?
Did he stop talking yet? Like, I'm not entirely sure. Look, this is a Republican Party that is unified behind him, particularly convention week is a unifying thing. He talks about being unifying, and what he really seems to mean is to unify the Republican Party. And of course, his survival of an assassination attempt, I mean, can't help but to give him sympathy, not only within the Republican Party, but I think more broadly on a human level. It is hard to look at somebody who has the physical manifestation of having been shot within the last week and not, feel some compassion for that. So if you take the extra step that a lot of the people at the Republican convention truly adore this man, this was a big moment for him in making sure that his party's behind him going into the general election.
You know, I do think that a lot of Americans have stopped paying attention to the rambling part of the Donald Trump speech. He gives these rally speeches once every couple of months. If you're not a Trump supporter, even if you're on the margins and are not paying attention close to politics, you probably don't ever watch any of these speeches. This was an opportunity for a lot of Americans to see that style speech. I mean, how could it potentially go over if you're a voter that's in the middle?
So I think there's a kind of a question of how long people stay tuned in. I mean, not only do they tune it out if they happen to be watching it like deep in, but I think for most people, they're probably watching the first 10, 15 minutes if they're watching.
Yeah.
And the first 10, 15 minutes of this speech was basically him recounting this harrowing experience of being shot at. So I think a lot of people probably tuned out. I think most independent voters aren't watching the Republican convention to get their feel for like what does the middle look like. For those that stuck around, they got the Trump rally version of Trump. There was nothing, sort of moderate or reaching out to the middle about the vast majority of that speech.
Okay, John, thanks for rushing back. We appreciate it. Let's turn to Yamiche now in Michigan, where she's been talking to voters. Obviously, Yamiche, this is a Midwest battleground state that the Trump campaign has set their sights on. His VP pick, J.D. Vance, from that region. What were people thinking about when they watched that speech last night?
Well, as you said, I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this is a city that's in a swing county, in a swing state. It's the kind of place that the Meet the Press team here loves to look at it and study, because it's really a place where you can sort of feel the pulse of voters here. And last night, that long speech, I watched it along some voters who were really looking at whether or not former President Trump changed his tone. Take a listen to what they told me. By a show of support, who detected a sort of change in tone from former President Trump?
Definitely.
Initially, yeah.
Like in the beginning, I thought he started out okay, but then as the speech went on, it just sounded like the old Trump.
I was hoping, though, for the good of the country, right, if he does win, that we would see that this message of unity would carry through more consistently through the speech, and it did not.
Yeah, I go back to Saturday where a 20-year-old kid tried to take his life and assassinate him. Like he kept saying, I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be here. He's here. And that's a testimony to what he did in the past and what he plans on doing in the future. I think he's going to unite people. I think he's going to bring people together and do the right thing that's best for the country.
So it was really fascinating to watch this R-N.C. speech by former President Trump with these voters, because the Trump supporters, two of them that were sitting there with me, they were really praising this speech. They were into it. They were nodding. They were sort of really smiling. We also had a Nikki Haley voter, though, who remains undecided. He came into it thinking maybe if Trump says something that's interesting, says something that's unifying, maybe there's a chance that he could maybe get on board with him, but heard nothing that changed his mind. And then you had a Democratic voter. Now, she was open to voting for Republicans because she doesn't like she doesn't like President Biden. She says that he should step aside, but she's also reluctantly going to vote for him because she does not see herself ever being able to vote for former President Trump. But it's interesting. She said at one point that this speech sounded like a rambling fourth grader who was trying to meet a word count. So she was really sort of biting in her criticism, and at times she was even sighing and visibly sort of shaking her head, saying, "Look, he's lying." She said that she really didn't believe a lot of the speech when he was talking about the fraud in the 2020 election, as well as tax cuts. So really, I think this was a speech that fed red meat to the base, but really didn't change any minds here, Ryan.
Okay, and my apologies to all the Buckeyes that were watching, that I suggested that where you are in Michigan is where J.D. Vance is from. I meant region wide, not state. But Yamiche, great report. I appreciate it. And up next, you're looking at what folks warmly refer to as the blue screen of death. It greeted millions of people worldwide on their devices today, with airports, hospitals, and businesses all feeling the effects of a massive tech outage. We'll have the very latest on that story. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. All day, we have been following the fallout from that massive IT outage that has affected travelers, businesses, banks, and even hospitals around the world. The outage was caused by a cybersecurity update from a company called CrowdStrike, which then impacted Microsoft Windows users and Microsoft's cloud services. CrowdStrike says that it has rolled out a fix for the issue, but the outage has forced the cancellations of hundreds of flights here in the United States and thousands across the globe. It's also forced several major hospitals to postpone surgeries or doctor's appointments, while also disrupting 911 systems in at least 3 states. Here's CrowdStrike's CEO on NBC earlier today.
It wasn't a cyber attack, you know, it was related to this this content update. When you look at software, it is a very complex world, and there's a lot of interactions, and always staying ahead of the adversary is certainly you know, a tall task. So these sort of things, obviously, you know, you try to understand and mitigate them. And in some cases, you have a weird interaction, and it didn't seem like it happened on every Windows system.
NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans joins me now. So what do we know? I mean, what caused today's massive outage, Christine?
What a day. What a day. I mean, unprecedented. Look, basically, CrowdStrike, those are the good guys trying to keep the bad guys out of your system, trying to keep the hackers and the cyber thieves out of the system. And a glitch from CrowdStrike actually caused all of this problem. So, you know, they're the defenders that caused a whole lot of hurt today. And they're getting it under control, and they have a patch and a fix, but it's just like a set of dominoes. And it's going to ripple for, you know, probably a few more days. I mean, you think of all the people today who had to reschedule surgery or doctor's appointments, or the Social Security Administration closed its doors because it couldn't do its business. So that's a whole day lost for Social Security and others. So it's just really a difficult day. And I'll tell you something really interesting, Ryan. I was hearing somebody talking about it like it was Y2K 24 years ago, when the world was worried about one extra number, you know, blowing up all these complex systems. That's what happened today.
Yeah. So is this a CrowdStrike problem, or is it a Microsoft problem? Who's more to blame?
It seems like it's a CrowdStrike problem. And one question a lot of people are saying is, how come this was rolled out so quickly? I mean, usually, for example, for NBC, right, we had some problems here. You know, shouldn't this patch have been tested separately by each of these companies using Microsoft and CrowdStrike? And then, if there were no problems, then passed along. So there'll be some after-action research, I'm sure, about what went wrong and how they could have done this better and how to make sure it doesn't happen again.
So to that point, is this a one-off, or should we be concerned that what happened today is a red flag for something like this to happen in the future?
I mean, one thing that it kind of alerts us all to is how interconnected everything is and how easy this was to I mean, this whole system is to prevent from cyber attacks, and just the system itself caused a whole bunch of problems. It seems like it could be a one-off. I'm pretty sure that the company will never let this happen again. You know, they've probably learned from this mistake. But, you know, 300 of the 500 Fortune 500 companies have this particular company's software. So it shows you just how big it is and how many systems it is in. But it was amazing to watch it roll from Asia to Europe to the United States. You know, by 9 a.m. this morning, it was very clear that this was, you know, just a real tough rolling ball of pain today.
Well, maybe on the bright side, somebody got the day off because of this, Christine. I'm trying to look on the bright. Was it us?
Was it you?
But maybe somebody somewhere got the day off as a result.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, yeah. I'll look at it that way.
All right, Christine Romans, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And hundreds of mourners today paying their respects to Correspondent. Of course, there's a private funeral was held for the former fire chief and father of two who was shot and killed during the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. The former president honored Correspondent last night during his acceptance speech at the Republican convention, where his firefighting helmet and jacket were on stage. As the investigation into the events leading up to and after the shooting continue, we learned today that Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle will testify before the House Oversight Committee on Monday. We are also learning more today about the ongoing investigation into the shooter, Thomas Crooks. Two senior officials tell NBC News a bulletproof vest was found in Crooks's vehicle in addition to explosive devices. Those officials also say investigators are looking at whether Crooks possibly scouted the venue where the rally took place days in advance, and that the information gathered so far does not show anyone else being involved. After the break, I'll talk to one of the Democratic House lawmakers who came out today to call for the president to step aside and not run for re-election. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. And as we've said, 33 congressional Democrats are now calling for President Biden to withdraw from the 2024 race. And that includes Democrats from all wings of the party. Among those who broke with Biden today, Congressman Zoe Lofgren, a Pelosi ally and a former member of the January 6th Select Committee, and the former chair of the House Progressive Caucus, Congressman Mark Pocan, and Congressman Greg Landsman, who represents a battleground district in the red state of Ohio. And joining me now is Congressman Landsman to talk more about this decision. So, Congressman, you were on this program last week. At that point, you weren't ready to call for President Biden to end his campaign. Why today? What changed?
I've had several days back in the district and hundreds of conversations over the course of the last couple of weeks, and voters here and the district is really interesting in that it's an equal number of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. It's a 50-50 district. So what happens here, I think, is very telling in terms of what is going to happen around the country. And what I hear from folks is we want change. We don't want either of these candidates. We don't think Trump is fit to be president of the United States. He's going to upend our democracy, our lives. We're tired of the chaos and extremism, and that Biden should step aside and let somebody else, run this campaign and make the case against Trump. The Biden camp's going to have to make the decision, although it's ultimately the president's. So whatever he decides. But I think he should step aside for the good of the party, but more importantly, the good of the country. And President Biden cares deeply about this country, and he cares deeply about our democracy and our freedom, and I think he'll do the right thing.
So you are calling on him to step down from the race, but you don't think he should resign. And I'm wondering where the disconnect there is. If you don't think he's able to serve or shouldn't serve another 4-year term or fit to win re-election, how is it that you think he's still capable of being president of the United States right now?
Yeah, so it's two different questions. One is, can he govern? And of course, he can. And the second one is, can he win this election? Can he make the case against Donald Trump and do so in a way that lifts up candidates across the country in districts like mine and states like Ohio? Because, if Trump becomes president and has the House and the Senate, he will control all three branches of government. And that is unsettling for most people. There are folks who really love Donald Trump, and there are folks who really love Joe Biden. But most people would like to see something new and a return to normalcy. They want to see pragmatism and bipartisanship and folks who are going to protect their democracy and their freedom and build an economy around them, not billionaires and big corporations. And that requires winning this race. And there are, as my friend Jared Moskowitz said the other day, there are three races, one for the White House, one for the House, and one for the Senate. We have to win all three. And I don't believe that Mr. Biden can do that, make that case. He has struggled for weeks now. And I think the vice president can. I think she will energize young people, and she's a former prosecutor, so she'll be able to prosecute that case against former President Donald Trump.
So let's pin you down on that. So if President Biden exits the race, you're supporting Vice President Harris to take his place?
I think she would be a really good candidate, and again, I think she'll excite young people, and she will do a really good job of making the case, not just against Donald Trump, but for democracy, what it looks like to strengthen our democracy and the need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. She'll make the case for restoring reproductive freedom in a very compelling, convincing way. And she'll make the case about what kind of an economy we want to build. And so I think she'll do incredibly well.
So let's talk about the time that Democrats have wasted here. It's been 3 weeks since that debate performance, and there's still a lot of hand-wringing over the future of where the party's headed. How concerned are you about all of this time that's been spent infighting as opposed to taking the case to Donald Trump?
Every time, at least in my life, when there's been moments of turbulence, adversity, there is also opportunity that, I can take advantage of or not. And I think there's a real opportunity here to provide the American people with the thing they've been asking for a while, which is change. They want new leadership. So, yeah, it's not fun and it's unsettling for a lot of people, but we'll get through it. And a few weeks from now, we'll have a nominee, and whoever that nominee will coalesce around that person. And, look, there's a majority of voters who want to make sure that Trump is not president again. There are, again, folks who really love him, but there's a anti-Trump coalition that I believe represents a majority of voters.
So let's talk about your district. You won this race by about 5 points in 2022. You've described it just during this interview as a 50-50 district. Do you think if Joe Biden were at the top of the ticket that you'd have a difficult time winning in November?
That is one thing we don't know. I mean, we don't have updated polling, and it's one of those things where I feel very confident in what we've been able to do in terms of building a reputation of somebody who just keeps his head down, does the work, is reliable, is accountable, is bipartisan, transparent, all the things that voters wanted in a member of Congress. So, we're in a good position. Also, the district is one that it's 50-50 and an equal number of Democrats, independents, and Republicans. Most everyone in this district wants to see our democracy protected. They want to see freedoms restored, reproductive freedom in particular, and they want an economy that's built around them. Yeah. So I think we'll be fine. Though I do worry that some folks are just going to not vote because they don't have the kind of energy I think they'll have if we give them the change they're asking for.
Let me close with this. You are roughly the same age as J.D. Vance. You're a little bit older. You guys are roughly from the same area of Ohio. I know the geography there is something that you guys take a lot of pride in. What do you think about him as being a member of the Republican ticket right now? And did his entry into the race impact your decision at all to try and encourage President Biden to get out of this race because you're concerned about J.D. Vance being the vice president?
It's a great question. No, I'd be concerned if I were supporting that ticket, the Trump-Vance ticket. We know Mr. Vance here. I grew up in Butler County. He grew up in Butler County. I live in Cincinnati. He lives in Cincinnati. We have very different views on where the country needs to go and how we need to show up in the world. He wants to cut Social Security, Medicare. He wants to ban abortions, no exceptions. He will always put billionaires and big companies before us. And he's part of that terrible rhetoric, that incendiary rhetoric that people are so tired of. And so we're both in Cincinnati. I won this district, our district. He lost it. So I think that's very telling.
Okay. Congressman Greg Landsman, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
Still to come, a pivotal presidential debate, an assassination attempt, a convention, and a campaign crisis. It's been an absolutely massive month in American politics, to say the least. I'll talk to a former Republican governor and a former Democratic senator about the path forward for both parties. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. It's a whole new campaign. That's what our friend Chuck Todd would say about where we're heading. He writes, we are getting awfully close to the moment where it might be fair to say throw out everything you thought you knew about this election. As Chuck explains, the pressure on Biden to withdraw and the failed Trump assassination attempt could trigger a whole new level of voter interest in this race on both sides of the aisle. I'm joined now by Pat McCrory, the former Republican governor of North Carolina, and by Heidi Heitkamp, former Democratic senator of North Dakota. She's now the director of the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, and she's a CNBC contributor. Wow. Take a deep breath, both of you. It's been a wild couple of weeks. This month of politics, it seems like even TV drama writers would say is too far-fetched. People would watch the show and not believe it. So, Governor, I want to start with your reaction, particularly to perhaps the inevitable conclusion of the R-N.C. with a typical Trump stump speech. Are you a little disappointed that he couldn't hold it together and really stick to what he had pledged, and that was a more unifying speech?
I thought the first 30 minutes was the best I've heard. And then he did go back into the stump speech that I've been hearing since 2016, But it's obvious to me that Chris LaCivita, the campaign manager for Trump, who was my governor's campaign manager in 2016, their whole goal is to get the blue-collar worker in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and even the retail worker in Nevada with the no tax on tips. And their whole message, I mean, with Kid Rock from Detroit, Michigan, singing, their whole message was trying to get the Biden blue-collar worker to make the big difference in a close election. And I thought it was extremely strategic with their goal, very apparent goal, to get the blue-collar working man and woman, black and white, to vote for Trump instead of the Democrats, which was pretty gutsy, especially with the union worker.
Yeah, and do you think that's what he means by unity, reaching out to that section of voter that may traditionally vote Democrat, trying to convince them that this version of the Republican Party is better for them?
Absolutely. I think it's all about numbers. This is an electoral college, state by state. It's not a national election. And the main focus, that entire convention was on Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. And if they get those, they win regardless, based upon the electoral college votes in the other states in the polls. And there may be upsets, the New Hampshires and the North Carolinas and so forth. But it was a Midwest strategy all the way. I'd be curious what Heidi has to say. Yeah. She's pretty smart, too, in this.
That's where we're going next. Senator, your thoughts on this idea of Trump reaching out to these blue-collar voters that, labor Democrats in many ways. Is that a message that could be resonating?
The blue-collar movement away from the Democratic Party. I always tell people, when I started out in politics, I had two base groups of voters: elderly, people over 65, and blue-collar, working men and women. And those two groups have really defected from the Democratic Party. And Trump, Reagan brought a bunch back, and Trump brought a bunch that were really low propensity or no propensity voters into the fold. He may have already capped the amount that he could get. Mm-hmm. I think it would have been a smarter play to suburban women, and I think that's make America safer again. That night was really playing to concerns that people have about how secure is their family, how secure are they, both economically and physically. And Trump had a beautiful convention until he talked. He started out for 20 minutes. It was, a different Trump, kinder, gentler, very personal story about, his emotion or how he felt, what was happening when he went, when he was almost assassinated, just really riveting television. And then he just went off the rails. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, at that moment, the Democratic Party breathed a sigh of relief, because a kinder, gentler Donald Trump would appeal to those suburban women if they thought he really had changed. And this proved that he didn't. So I think at the end, he beautifully executed convention until the principal got up. And then things went off the rails.
Well, then let's talk about how that impacts President Biden, Senator. Does he see that speech last night, and does he say, this is a guy I can beat, stop bugging me, I'm staying in this race?
Well, I don't know what the president's thinking is right now. He obviously is getting a lot of advice. But notice that the other Democratic leaders, including the one you just spoke to, who watched that speech last night, didn't come to the same conclusion. And this is a game of numbers. And, you say, well, you've waited 3 weeks. Well, a couple things were happening during that 3-week period. Number one, internal discussions, not a lot of people willing to step out and say it publicly. Then what you have after that is Nancy Pelosi signaling, yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Talk to him publicly. And so I think that he's got a lot to think about. But the most important thing is whether, in fact, he's going to lead a winning ticket. And that's what the concern is among Democrats right now.
So, Governor, I wonder if you're a Republican right now, and the Trump campaign in particular, Chris LaCivita in particular, I know, has been planning a campaign against Joe Biden for quite a while, years, in fact. If somehow this ticket gets abandoned and it's Kamala Harris or it's somebody else, how does that impact their game plan? And could this reinvigorate Democrats right now who find themselves in a pretty difficult position?
I think anything any change would probably be good for the Democrats. As a Republican, I'd probably be more concerned about maybe the governor of Pennsylvania or Michigan, or maybe even a Cory Booker coming into the race, based upon what we've seen in the past with the vice president. No disrespect, but that's what I would think as a Republican at this point in time. But it would probably be wise as a Republican, I'm saying this to the Democrats, I think their only chance is to possibly change and try to get some new momentum that obviously is not there. But I don't think the strategy of going after the blue collar worker would change, and it's still direct toward those Midwestern states, regardless of who they're running against. And that's why he brought up the immigration issue. That's why they brought up the tariff issue. That's why the electric car issue is huge in the Michigan area. And it was very strategic messages at that point in time with all the speakers. And that was their success of the convention.
So, Senator, do you agree with the governor here that perhaps the party should look beyond just Kamala Harris as an alternative to President Biden?
Well, I think that most people in the party think that this shouldn't be a coronation, that what would energize is a competition. And, I'm not the majority in thinking that, but I think that having a lot of voices saying the same thing and then coming out of a convention unified after the delegates would make their selection would give a huge amount of momentum moving forward. We in this country think presidential elections have to be 2 years long. People all across the world do pick their leaders in 4-month increments. So I think that this could energize the Democratic base, but I also think that Joe Biden will have a lot of loyalty out there and will also energize the base. Whether it'll be enough to overcome concerns that people have, or a very strategic, very disciplined campaign with an undisciplined candidate. I think one of the differences in the Trump campaign this time, as opposed to the last 2 times, is he does have a very good campaign staff who completely understands modern campaigning. And so that's a disadvantage to the Democratic Party. You're seeing it in polling right now, but Joe Biden has has done a lot to put a ground game in those states reaching out. In 2020, we didn't go door to door because of COVID. The Republicans did. And so, I think the thought is the field game would make the difference in those swing states.
All right, we've got 20 seconds. You both can only answer this one word. I know that might be difficult for both of you, but will Joe Biden be the Democratic nominee this time next week? Governor, you go first.
No, I just can't see it, but they've got a heck of a process to work. It's going to be more like a British.
That's too many words. We're running out of time.
Election.
Senator, yes or no? Will he be the nominee?
Maybe. You said one word, maybe.
You both failed the assignment. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Pat McCrory, Heidi Heitkamp, we appreciate it. We're back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues on with Yasmin Vazougian in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.